Billboard put out a list of the 100 greatest Disney songs a few months back, covering not just the musical numbers featured in the 100-year-old company's classic films, but also songs from television series and even those composed for theme park attractions. Going through the list kind of reinforced to me why I don't really care for lists that much. There is an attempt made here to be as comprehensive as possible, and while commendable, there are some glaring omissions. Obviously, no list put together by someone else is going to match my own personal tastes, just like no opinion I give on this channel will entirely align with yours. The nature of internet discourse is that of debate and analysis based on our own opinions. We all have takes, and in regards to this list, there are a few that have been given already. Anthony Fantano gave his thoughts on Billboard's list, and I highly recommend you check that out if you want to see someone go through these songs a little more individually. Coming away from this piece, I am left with two major takeaways. Firstly, they, with a small amount of exceptions, entirely excluded a whole category, if you will, of Disney songs. With 100 slots to fill, the fact that I can count on only one hand the amount of villain songs featured here is kind of insane. In a genre where the storytelling is aided through the use of song, the antagonist is bound to have their moment to shine. While we may be lacking in truly memorable bad guys from this studio today, it's undeniable that when Disney was putting out hit after hit, the antagonists that spawned from said hits have become some of the most iconic, not only in animation, but to ever grace the silver screen, aided in no small part by their villain songs. Whether you're a major Disney fan or not, I think the majority of people can agree that when Disney villain songs hit, they hit hard. At their absolute best, they're a powerful combination of sinister instrumentation, wickedly fun lyrics, and some dastardly animation. A chance for the songwriters, voice actors, and animators to travel to the dark side a little bit, to show the worlds of their films through the lens of evil. With the amount of fan rankings, top 10 lists, and overall discussion online about what are considered to be the best of the best villain songs, it just doesn't really make sense to me that there are so many absent from Billboard's list, especially when you see the more forgettable choices that they have in their stead. I counted a total of 5 songs that might qualify. Basically, Poor Unfortunate Souls was a great choice, and you can argue that it was kind of a given because the list was clearly made to tie into the Little Mermaid live-action remake. The 4 other songs I find myself struggling to totally call villain songs. Of course, that means I have to define what a villain song really is first, as obvious as that may seem. A villain song is a song typically sung by the main antagonist of a musical that either details their evil plan, personal philosophy, or has them gloat in some way about their current or past evil actions. Of course, there are always liberties a songwriter can take. For example, a villain song doesn't always have to be sung by the villain. Such is the case for Cruella de Vil, another villain song that actually made it to Billboard's list. It details Cruella's villainy, and adds a great bit of build-up before seeing her for the first time. Another example of this from Billboard's list is We Don't Talk About Bruno from Encanto. This is an odd one that I hesitate to really call a villain song, but Disney themselves has actually defined it as such. I think a way to look at this one is that it's a song about a perceived antagonist. Those singing the song are describing someone as evil, like in Cruella de Vil, but unlike Cruella, Bruno doesn't live up to how he's described. It's in a strange spot because with what we learn about Bruno, it kind of makes the song harder to define. Cruella de Vil and Poor Unfortunate Souls are classics that fit the definition perfectly, and I just struggle to place Bruno, just as much as I struggle with the other 2 choices from Billboard. I Wanna Be Like You from The Jungle Book, and this song from Muppets Most Wanted that I honestly was unaware of until seeing it on this list. The reason I'm spending time on these songs is because this list is supposed to represent the best songs from this studio. And the fact that I have to stretch so far to define all but 2 of these selections as villain songs shows just how little this entire fan-beloved category of Disney song was underrepresented. That is my first point that I want to make about what I see here. The second thing I noticed about this list is a little more personal to me, but after looking at some comment sections here and there, I'm glad to know that I'm not the only person who immediately noticed it. A lot of classic villain songs were ignored here, but at least the overall trope got some representation. Sadly, this cannot be said for what I believe to be one of Disney's finest musical efforts. A roaring symphonic epic of a film from a time when it seemed like the happiest place on earth wasn't afraid to dip their toes into some serious issues. One of the greatest risks taken in the history of this company, and its total exclusion from Billboard's list, feels like an echo of the controversy that it faced upon its original release over 26 years ago. For a company known for primarily giving life to fairy tales, it feels just as odd to look back on the decision to adapt Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame with contemporary sensibilities, as I'm sure it was when the idea was first presented. It's not the first novel that Disney ever adapted, but it clearly sticks out, not only in its style, but in its themes. There were some pretty obvious omissions and changes to the original story that were going to be made, but it's surprising just how many of those ideas presented in the classic piece of Gothic literature made it into the Walt Disney Pictures adaptation. It has a much more hopeful message and does end on a positive note, but the movie wasn't afraid to push it about as far as something that bears the family-friendly image of the House of Mouse can without being entirely shelved. Not only do its story elements hit the proper emotional beats, with a heartwarming lead character and the journey that he goes on for acceptance, but I truly believe that Hunchback has a near-perfect soundtrack. Near perfect. The songs are emotionally captivating, brilliantly arranged, and contain some of the more powerful lyrics and imagery that you'll find in any of the movies from the Disney Renaissance. The sentiment of these songs being some of the best work from the studio is one that's not only held by fans, but also echoed by those who worked on the film. Alan Menken is a legend when it comes to scoring Disney films. His work during the Renaissance period produced songs and scores that have become iconic today, and earned him multiple awards. So when someone so acclaimed as Menken looks back on the song The Bells of Notre Dame and says, "It's the best opening number I've written for any project," that should be enough to earn Hunchback at least one spot on a list with 100 slots. The people that made this film know just how good these songs are. They put so much effort into making this film the artistic achievement that it is, that it kind of bums me out that it seems forgotten until a fan like myself or others online posts about it. And so we have reached the point of the video. If we're going to talk about Disney villain songs and discuss the best of the best songs featured in any Disney project, The Hunchback of Notre Dame has one song that has to be included in that discussion. And I think taking a look at it here will also help bring to light the power of a villain song and what it can do both to elevate a musical's narrative and add depth to an antagonist, to make a great villain even greater. The creators of The Hunchback of Notre Dame saved the best song in the entire film for the film's greatest character. So let's talk about Hellfire. If we're going to look at the song, first we have to introduce the character that sings it. Judge Claude Frollo is something wholly unique amongst the Disney villain lexicon. Where most stories told by this studio often have their true themes exemplified by their main characters, Frollo is the vessel through which the filmmakers channel the truer themes of corrupt religious power in the original novel. In a way, Frollo feels like the extreme of even some of the darkest Disney antagonists that came before him. He doesn't desire power, he already has it. Killing the innocent is not a necessity for him to keep his power, it is for him to further achieve his goal of persecution of an entire people. The Romani people are who Frollo perceives as his enemy, and he justifies the cruelest of actions against them with a perceived self-righteousness. The only thing that Frollo truly fears is the wrath of the very same god that he hides behind when committing heinous acts of evil. Why I believe that The Hunchback of Notre Dame is such a powerful musical is because it uses its musical sequences to further flesh out its characters, in ways that the dialogue simply can't. The three principal characters of the story each have songs that they sing when they are alone and allow themselves to become most vulnerable. Out There, God Help the Outcasts, and of course Hellfire are all emotional songs that delve into their characters a little bit more. The songs that aren't sung specifically about one character aren't just used to entertain either, save for one. These musical numbers are used to move the story forward and introduce elements of the film's world to the audience. Everything that we need to know about this story is not told through an opening narration, but through the biggest and most epic intro number that Disney has ever done. What's relevant to this video about The Bells of Notre Dame is not just what it does for the backstory of our lead character and villain, but also for how it introduces us to what goes on inside the mind of Judge Claude Frollo. There were many, many changes made from the original novel, and the biggest for Frollo was made for pretty obvious reasons. In the novel, he is the Archdeacon of the Notre Dame Cathedral, who willingly takes in the infant Quasimodo. In the film, Frollo is an authoritative judge, seeking to, as the song says, purge the world of vice and sin. He believes his quest to be mandated by God, so that naturally means he doesn't show a single ounce of remorse for crushing a woman's head on the steps of the cathedral just a few minutes into the film.
I am guiltless. She ran, I pursued.
Almost immediately after this, he goes to drown her baby simply for having deformities, claiming the child to be some kind of unholy demon. The only reason he stops is because the Archdeacon arrives to admonish him for what he's done. What The Bells of Notre Dame does for Frollo is establish everything we need to know about this character before he is given his own song later to further expand those character elements. This song tells us that Frollo hates the Romany people, will commit horrible acts of violence including murder if he deems it righteous to do so, shows no remorse, deflects any and all accountability, and most importantly, is terrified of the consequences he may face for his actions by God. Frollo isn't a man of the cloth in this version, but he definitely fears the man upstairs. He spares Quasimodo and raises him as his own, not because he feels any guilt over killing the baby's mother, but because he feels that this will make it okay in the eyes of God. Even going as far as to add that when Quasimodo grows older, he may be of some use to Frollo. For many years, Frollo continues to persecute the Romany people of Paris, all while raising Quasimodo as a sort of son, but never going as far as to treat him with any real love or affection. He reminds the young man every day that he is an outcast, instilling the idea in him that he is a monster that will be rejected, even hated by the outside world, should he try to venture out there. The final bit of context that's needed before we dive into Hellfire is who Hellfire is being sung about. Esmeralda is an interesting character because of how she is seen through the eyes of the characters she interacts with. Quasimodo sees Esmeralda as everything good that humanity is capable of. She cares because it's simply the right thing to do, the very first person in his life that has shown him true compassion. Despite living in a church his entire life, Quasimodo has never really had an experience that made him feel the glory of the God that the people who come to Notre Dame worship, sing, and pray to. After his interactions with this kind person inspire him to regain faith in a world he was starting to believe was just as cruel as his master had warned him, Quasimodo rings the bells to the tune of Heaven's Light. It's a short but sweet little song about how inspiring kindness can be.
I swear it must be heaven's light.
Meeting Esmeralda changed Quasimodo, and he sings joyously about that. Of course, he isn't the only person changed by meeting Esmeralda in this story, and definitely isn't the only one that has something to express in song about that change. The reason I've spent some time on Heaven's Light here is because it is essential to the experience of Hellfire. The characters of Frollo and Quasimodo are dramatic foils of one another. One holding humanity up with a generous optimism that the world can be a great place if people like Esmeralda exist, and the other purging everything good about humanity from himself, preaching the evils of the outside world that only fester and grow if people like Esmeralda exist. You see, these two songs, sharing the same track on the official film soundtrack, are both about Esmeralda. She is the very best of humanity, and she is the temptation of the devil. After meeting Esmeralda, Frollo finds himself utterly infatuated with her, but not in any way that can be perceived as romantic. This is obsessive, predatory lust. The inner battle that Frollo has over his feelings for Esmeralda is the subject of his villain song. In this stunningly animated, powerfully voice-acted, hauntingly written sequence, the character of Judge Claude Frollo is taken to a whole new level. It reinforces every single thing that we know about this character, introduces new elements to him that spell his doom later in the story, and properly defines him by his most prominent trait: his hypocrisy. The camera pulls away from the Notre Dame Cathedral and to an open window in the Palace of Justice, where Frollo steps forward and begins to sing.
Beata Maria, you know I am a righteous man.
Hellfire begins as a prayer to the Virgin Mary. Frollo starts his prayer, as you would imagine, by praising himself.
Of my virtue I am justly proud.
We can learn a lot about Frollo through his prayer. We've seen his cruelty, but by how he sings, we can better understand how he's able to so effortlessly deal it out. In this quest for purity, Frollo has eliminated any empathy that he may have toward others. The rest of the world is, as he puts it, vulgar, weak, and licentious.
You know I'm so much purer than the common, vulgar, weak, licentious crowd.
I love the language that songwriter Stephen Schwartz uses when writing some of Frollo's verses. Words like licentious, and earlier in the film, for the first half of Out There, calumny and consternation reinforce the emphasis that Frollo puts on the descriptions of vulgarity. He's a fire and brimstone man, to say the least. His vocabulary lessons to Quasimodo reflect that.
A. Abomination. B. Blasphemy. C. Contrition. D. Damnation.
A concept that I'm sure Frollo is pretty familiar with is that of the 7 deadly sins. It will become pretty clear as the song continues that Frollo covers lust fairly well, but it's also important to remember pride. Not only is Frollo proud of his perceived virtuous behavior, but justly so. He throws it back on the Virgin Mary in his prayer, like, come on, you know how good I am, of course I should be proud of persecuting and murdering people. Frollo leaves the window, looking out at the cathedral, and approaches a massive fireplace beneath a ridiculously huge crucifix. The darkness of the room is now only illuminated by the raging flames. Fire is said to symbolize many things: divinity, life itself. In religion, it can even represent purification, baptism by fire. However, it can also be seen as symbolic of punishment, damnation, and hell. For Frollo, the fire, at least for now, is desire. A desire that confuses him, leading him to pose the question to the Virgin Mary of, why?
Why I see her dancing there, why her smoldering eyes still scorch my soul.
As the flames dance, so does a fiery image of Esmeralda within them. She is seductive, alluring, beckoning the judge to her as she did when she danced at the festival earlier in the film. This vision of Esmeralda tempts Frollo, and the very notion of this perplexes him. Like, why would someone so pure as myself be so enamored with a vulgar commoner? There's that pride again. Obviously, there is an irony in praying to the Virgin Mary, a biblical figure so synonymous with purity, modesty, and virtue, about how you are obsessively lusting over a dancer. Those feelings are so vivid in his mind because I think this is the first time that Frollo has ever actually felt for someone. The fact that it happens to be one of the Romani people is what ultimately breaks his mind. This self-imposed religious purity has led Frollo to a point that regular affection for someone simply cannot exist within him, especially from an individual he views as so far beneath him. And so this must be a spell, witchcraft, seduction brought forth by the devil. Here, Frollo remembers that the divine purifying fire can also mean the pits of hell, and that desire quickly turns to fear.
Like fire, hellfire.
It's here that I find it most appropriate to sing the praises of the voice that brought Frollo to life. The late British actor Tony Jay is a legend in voice acting. Before Hunchback, he was known for portraying Megabyte, the main antagonist of the series reboot. He's also very popular among fans of the Legacy of Kain video game series. Hunchback wasn't even the first work that he did for Disney. In 1991, he voiced the villainous asylum warden in Beauty and the Beast. After Hunchback, he would do work for tons of Disney television shows. Tony Jay's performance as Frollo throughout the entire film is truly remarkable. The range of emotions that he's able to convey in just this one song alone is incredible, going from stoic and prideful to fearful to desperate and ending on menacingly unhinged. Frollo is a character whose devotion to religion, clashing with his selfish desires, ultimately leave him mentally destroyed. And it takes a hell of a voice actor to portray that progression. The way that he delivers just the word fire here just sends chills down my spine every time. I believe through the performance that Frollo is truly terrified, scared to death by where his feelings are leading him.
This burning desire is turning me to sin.
Of course, the vocal performance works in tandem with the character design and animation. That range of emotion captured in both the facial expressions and poses was nailed by Frollo's lead animator, Kathy Zielinski. Zielinski is very influential among Disney animators, having started out as one of the animators for characters like Ursula in The Little Mermaid before she was given the role of animation supervisor for Frollo, being only the second woman working at Disney to be given a supervising animator position. Her style is known to take a lot of influence from darker source material, with her character designs and poses being perfectly suited for the villainous characters that she worked on, like Frollo, the snake form of Jafar in Aladdin, and another one of her credits as a character supervisor, Zekel Khan in The Road to El Dorado. Zielinski is credited for bringing this darker style back to Disney, citing the Night on Bald Mountain sequence from Fantasia as one of her biggest inspirations. The DNA of this sequence from Disney's past, namely the dramatic poses and the heavy emphasis on shadow, clearly inspired a lot of the animation and storyboarding for Hellfire. That storyboarding was done by Paul and Gaëtan Brizzi, the heads of the Disney animation studio in France that I'm sure I've horribly disrespected with my terrible pronunciation of their name. Crafted from the hands of these talented artists, Hellfire's visuals are bold, creating images that relish in the darkness of the scene. What is displayed through the animation is what Frollo is experiencing in his head as a tormented, evil man. Nowhere is this better represented than by the appearance of the hooded figures made out of blood, looking down on Frollo as he falls to his knees. Frollo is a judge, one that often condemns innocent people without allowing them the proper chance to defend themselves. Frollo relishes in being the supreme figure in power over the people of Paris. In this moment, Frollo finds himself on the other end of things for once. He appeals to an emotionless chorus of red cloaks who tower over him, judging him. Frollo, for the first time, feels that fear that so many of the Romani people did as he sent them to their unjust fate. I think this is the best time to discuss how Hellfire is structured lyrically. A lot of the song is done in a call and response format, with Frollo's prayers and declarations being met with chants in actual Latin. Frollo's opening verses are backed up by a Catholic prayer known as the Confiteor, a prayer that is recited before confession as an admission of sin. Ironic, since Frollo never actually admits to doing anything wrong, but we'll get to that in a moment. As he makes his case to the Red Cloaks, claiming that none of his actions are his fault, they respond with, "My fault."
It's not my fault. I'm not to blame. It is.
Knowing full well that the deeds of Claude Frollo are entirely his own to pay for.
It is the gypsy girl, the witch who set this flame. It's not my fault.
This can also be seen as further evidence that what the Archdeacon said is true about the eyes of Notre Dame knowing all, having seen into Frollo's very soul. If you don't buy into the supernatural elements of the film, you can also see this as Frollo attempting to bury that small bit of guilt over his lustful feelings that he may have. These red figures being a manifestation of that supposed guilt. As I said earlier, everything that we know about Frollo's character from earlier in the story is expanded upon and reaffirmed here. Like a social media influencer that scams their audience, Frollo will go to any lengths to dodge any and all accountability for his evil deeds. It can't be his fault, because then everything he has lied to himself about, that he is purer than all others, will be proven untrue. Even going as far as to kinda put the blame on God for what he's feeling.
If in God's plan, he made the devil so much stronger than a man.
There are many instances of foreshadowing Frollo's ultimate fate in Hellfire. One of my favorites that I didn't even notice until watching it for this video is the light forming the shape of a coffin here on the ground. This scene is full of so many little details that I'm still finding out about them to this day. Another instance that is commonly seen as foreshadowing is how the red hooded figures turn into flames that wrap around Frollo and pull him toward the fire, showing that he will eventually burn and his time is running out. While I think that is absolutely what the filmmakers intended, I actually have my own alternative view of that moment that I'd like to share, one that I'll explain here in a moment. What happens next is my favorite part of the song. As Frollo begs desperately for help from the Virgin Mary, Alan Menken's orchestrations soar beautifully. The deep, threatening choir from before is now replaced by something that sounds angelic, but sad.
Maria, don't let the siren cast her spell. Don't let her fire sear my flesh and bone.
I love the way that the music changes to fit the mood of each lyric. As Frollo begs for help so as not to lose himself, the orchestration reflects that, but also doesn't forget that this is a sick, evil man when he asks for Esmeralda to be destroyed. Listen to the changes here.
Destroy Esmeralda, and let her taste the fires of hell, or else let her be mine and mine alone.
One of the many reasons that I love a good villain song, especially those from Disney, is that they're often very fun, with the antagonists having ample opportunity to relish in their dastardly deeds. And they're a great chance to explore these characters just a little bit more, a way through song to make them appear more powerful, thus more threatening to our heroes. Think about some of your favorite bad guy songs from Disney. Take note of how they portray the antagonists. Often, by the end of the song, they're at the top of the world. As the music builds and their lyrics conjure up more violent imagery, we see these antagonists at their full power. Be Prepared, Gaston, and The World's Greatest Criminal Mind show our antagonists praised by their loyal followers, showing how they gain power either from fear, manipulation, or admiration. Some of these tunes play out over the course of our antagonist actually gaining a victory over the hero. Such is the case with Poor Unfortunate Souls and Friends on the Other Side. A major takeaway from a lot of these songs is how they are sinister yet upbeat at the same time, because the villain is in their element, doing what they do best. I love these songs because they're both fun to sing and fun to watch. Yet Hellfire is an outlier. It has the same narrative intent as the others, to expand upon our antagonist and give them the floor to display their villainy, but it's the tone that's so dramatically different. Hellfire is an exploration into Frollo's mind, a mind warped from years and years of self-imposed religious guilt and repressed desire. Villain songs aren't afraid to allow the reality of the film's world to reflect the inner thoughts of the characters. And in Frollo's case, when the real world slips away, he is left exposed, judged, and condemned to eternal damnation. This is not a song written to make Frollo feel powerful. We already know that he is. He has a legion of soldiers at his disposal. As is shown later in the film, he can freely do whatever he wants with no real pushback as a government official. If we already know that he is powerful and does evil things, then how does this sequence want us to feel about Frollo? Hellfire is written to make Frollo feel real. Frollo isn't a larger-than-life hunter loved by all but one. He isn't a power-hungry usurper who manipulates with empty promises to claim a position of status. He isn't a criminal mastermind or someone who uses magical abilities. He is a monster, however, a kind of monster that we're all familiar with. The first time I talked about Frollo on this channel was in my video discussing my love of animated villains. And there was a specific comment I received in regards to Frollo, written many different ways, but all echoing the same sentiment. Frollo is such a terrifying villain because Frollo is real. An old man in a position of power who uses said power to persecute the innocent based on his personal religious beliefs, while hiding behind those same beliefs when confronted about the morality of his choices. A sexual predator who lusts after a woman and blames her. Hellfire as a song makes the daring choice to dissect this type of real-world monster, to let us in on the ways that evil men justify their evil, to expose them as the pathetic hypocrites that they are, and to take us on a journey to the final stages of their madness. On that journey, we actually see something rare happen. Frollo is actually given a way out by the writers, a way to escape his fate by the end of the story. This part doesn't excuse any of his actions, but does solidify how much of a hypocrite Frollo is by offering him what he's been praying for the entire song. Frollo wants Esmeralda out of his life so that his soul may be saved, and as if God was listening, she leaves.
Minister Frollo, the gypsy has escaped. What? She's nowhere in the cathedral. She's gone.
It's up to the interpretation of the viewer as to whether God actually exists in the world of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. The gargoyles being alive could just be some classic Disney magic, but for Frollo, the moments where he sees statues watching him, red-hooded figures judging him, and a ghostly vision of Esmeralda could be explained as actual supernatural visions or a decaying mental state. I do think that this exchange with the guard does actually happen and isn't just a part of the surreal imagery of the scene, but the symbolism of a man appearing bathed in white, heavenly light before Frollo after he just begged for Esmeralda to leave him to inform him that she's gone seems pretty intentional to myself and many other fans online. A lot of fans, including myself, interpret this moment to be God giving Frollo one final chance to just forget Esmeralda and walk away with the knowledge that she escaped so that he can escape the damnation that he's so afraid of. But to fully cement Frollo's hypocrisy, he never really wanted her gone from his life. His prayers were ultimately empty. He wants Esmeralda, and he will have her by any means necessary.
Get out, you idiot. I'll find her. I'll find her if I have to burn down all of Paris.
So we come to the final verses of the song. No longer a prayer, but a declaration. Frollo has lusted, shown how prideful he is, and now he invokes his wrath on Esmeralda. If it didn't feel like a proper villain song to you before, it sure as hell does now.
Hellfire, dark fire, now gypsy, it's your turn.
In Frollo's hand for nearly the entire song is Esmeralda's scarf. Symbolically, this is meant to represent his lust for her that he is holding on to even as he prays. But it can also be seen as the last chance for humanity Frollo could have had in another world. In this alternative reality, he could have kept the scarf as a reminder of the woman he fell for and changed for the better. But he instead casts it into the raging flames. He resolves to offer Esmeralda an ultimatum that Tony J delivers hauntingly as the animators hold on Frollo's crazed expression, distorted by the rippling heat waves. He looks more like a monster now than he ever has.
Choose me or your pyre, be mine or you will burn.
In the final moments of Hellfire, Mencken reincorporates two musical motifs from The Bells of Notre Dame. The first is the overall orchestral theme of the entire movie. This same theme was actually used to end Heaven's Light, but was played in a way that sounds more optimistic and hopeful. Its use in Hellfire is heavy and dramatic, to align with the darker themes of the song. In response to probably the most foreboding lyrics ever written for a Disney animated film, we hear the Latin phrase, Kyrie eleison. The first time we hear this is when Frollo first appears on screen in The Bells of Notre Dame. And in a way, Frollo translates it for us in Hellfire, as he does with My Fault.
God have mercy on her.
Asking God to have mercy on him for what he is about to do further reinforces the way that Frollo thinks that prayer works, or at least gives us more insight into how he has used prayer as an excuse to do abhorrent things. The entirety of Hellfire is an empty prayer. Frollo never really asks for forgiveness because he doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. His true desire isn't for Esmeralda to disappear because she does, and he doubles down. The only thing he asks for is for mercy, because he believes that it's somehow owed to him. Like, by being such a great servant of God, he should be allowed this one thing. Pride goeth before the fall, and Frollo does fall. Earlier, I mentioned this moment where the judgmental cloaks turn to fire and envelop Frollo, pulling him toward the fire before vanishing. I interpret this moment as a warning to Frollo by God, as if to say, you will burn for these things that you have done and will do should you choose wrong. The guard comes in and Frollo seals his fate. The hooded figures that were banished into the fire by God are now unleashed again. Their shadows grow on the wall behind Frollo, cast there by the blaze of the fire. He has nowhere to run. The final moments of Hellfire are so striking, not just due to the visuals mixing with the swelling finale of the score, but for the way that it leaves Frollo in comparison to other Disney villains. Traditionally, the ending of a villain song is where the villain feels that they're at their most powerful. They've gained a victory over the hero, or they've set their evil plan into motion. Ursula steals Ariel's voice. Dr. Facilier turns Prince Naveen into a frog. Scar rallies his army of hyenas to overthrow Mufasa. What's important to note about these sequences is how they visually portray these characters as powerful. Their final shots often linger on the villain quite literally on top of the world. They've risen above everyone in some way. Low angles emphasize that sense of power that they've derived from their actions. Other characters in the scene often surround them in awe, further inflating the egos of characters like Gaston or Ratigan. Be Prepared reaches its high point by quite literally having Scar rise above the hyenas on a platform. At the end of their songs, these antagonists are shown to be powerful. Frollo, however, isn't made to feel that way. To say that the end of the song doesn't reach ridiculous levels of epicness would be a lie. It totally does, but it doesn't really feel like Frollo is on top of the world here. Frollo is surrounded, but not by adoring fans or evil minions. Dark shadows of those coming to collect his soul tower above him as he shrinks. He turns away from the fire in horror, only to fall to his knees before its power. He has finally succumbed to his lust. As Tony J belts out this massive final note, the camera pulls away from him. Shown from up high, almost like God looking down upon him, Frollo is left to collapse onto the cold ground in the dark. Hellfire isn't about Frollo's power, it's about his weakness. This great character flaw that he can't even fathom that he has completely defeated him. Frollo is going to burn for the evil that he has committed, and the actions that he takes next will only serve to bring him to his ultimate fate. For all of his preaching about the evils out there in the world, it never once dawns on Frollo that the only character in this story that sings outside of Notre Dame about harming innocent people is himself. Frollo is the evils of the outside world that he warns Quasimodo about, and he has a chance within this brilliantly constructed piece of music to recognize that fact, to change, to escape the fate that is shown to him. But despite being shown the ending of his journey before him, Frollo sets it in stone. He is left on his knees, small, powerless before a force he isn't human enough to understand for the first time in his life, and he collapses, his unconscious body in the shape of an inverted crucifix on the ground. Musical sequences in Disney films can become iconic over time. The moments we associate with the films themselves when we hear their titles have the potential to be these scenes. Just saying the title Aladdin can bring forth the imagery of a whole new world. The Lion King could be Timon, Pumbaa, and Simba swaying their heads back and forth to the rhythm of Hakuna Matata. Beauty and the Beast might bring visions of that stunning ballroom scene. These are the moments where the animators, songwriters, and voice actors can create magical moments that enforce the legacy of their project. My love of the Hunchback of Notre Dame is one that I actually had to develop over time. The first time that I experienced it was when I stayed the night over at my grandparents' house. Just looking for something to watch, I rummaged through their collection of VHS tapes and found a copy of Hunchback. Watching it that evening, it didn't set in for me immediately. I thought it was pretty good, but I didn't really think that I would ever want to watch it again. However, I do remember thinking that it was very dark for something from Disney, even at that age. A few years later, when I had the opportunity to watch it again and heard the title, the very first thing that came to my mind was Hellfire. I didn't remember every single lyric, but the imagery was powerful enough to stick with me all those years later. Even having come back to this movie so many times after having fallen in love with it, I still associate this film with its villain song. I've mentioned many villain songs in this video that I love, but none of them are powerful enough to be the first thing that comes to my mind about their respective films. These images are so powerfully evil that upon doing research for this video, I expected to hear stories of serious pushbacks from the higher-ups of the studio wanting to remove or rewrite the sequence. This is Disney after all. They are notorious for protecting their family-friendly image at any cost. This thought that Disney would object to Hellfire was actually one that co-director Kirk Wise had when presenting the scene to Roy Disney and Michael Eisner. However, to my shock, and I know even more to his, they were cool with it. Actually, they were apparently emphatic about it. When submitting Hunchback to the MPAA for a rating, Disney argued that having sequences like Hellfire in Hunchback showed their intent to make animation that could appeal to both adults as well as children. It's almost like animation is for everyone and not just for kids, but I've never made that argument on this channel before. Of course, before giving them their G rating, some serious precautions had to be taken to ensure it. The fiery specter of Esmeralda dancing to tempt Frollo had to be painstakingly animated in a way that showed she was wearing clothes. Any hint of nudity would have immediately set the MPAA off. Also, the MPAA were reportedly uncomfortable with the use of the word sin in the song. So you'll notice that when Frollo sings it, it's sort of drowned out by the music and other sound effects of the scene. This was actually the idea of producer Don Hahn. This goes to show that the artists working on this scene really fought for it. They knew how good this song was and how important it was to the themes of the story. Their hard work clearly shows here, but what amazes me about this whole thing is that Disney actually fought for its artists and their vision. Disney does not exactly have the best track record in that department. That's perfectly exemplified by the currently ongoing strikes in Hollywood. I look at Disney as a film studio the same way that I look at Nintendo as a video game publisher. I like a lot of your stuff, even love a handful of it, but I really can't stand you as a corporation. It just sucks that I can so easily praise the great works of art that have come from the artists employed by Disney, but have to also live with the knowledge that those works of art come from a company that really prioritizes the commercialization of that art rather than the message of the art itself. Looking back on Hunchback, though, it's nice to know that, at least in this instance, the higher-ups were on the side of the filmmakers in crafting this masterful sequence. Villain songs like Hellfire are just as beloved as some of the more friendly, popular efforts from the House of Mouse. So when there's a list that claims to rank the best of the best songs from this studio, I felt compelled to make this video when I saw many of the acclaimed villain songs just left off for the sake of Disney Channel songs that nobody really remembers, and for the fact that I didn't see a single song from one of their most mature, thought-provoking, and beautiful animated musicals. My most popular videos on this channel are the ones that discuss aspects of animation that I believe are powerful and make this medium of storytelling so profound for so many. This video, I feel, is kind of the culmination of the ideas that I presented in those other two. Frollo is an amazing, badass animated villain whose actions reinforce the idea that animation can go to darker places and can be enjoyed by audiences of all ages. And Hellfire is both of those factors distilled into one dark, amazing moment in animation history. Hellfire is my all-time favorite Disney song, period. And while I won't go as far as to say that it's objectively the best song they ever did and should be number one on somebody else's list, I will argue that it stands above every other villain song that they've ever done. It's not as catchy or as fun as some of the others, but I think that's what makes my point. It's a song that isn't supposed to be fun. It's evil. To wrap this video up, I want to discuss the legacy of Hellfire. Simply, it's the most important song in the entire movie, and if you don't think that's true, let's take a look at something that Disney has been doing, much to my annoyance, for the past few years. Remaking everything that they've ever made before. A Hunchback remake was announced to be in development a few years back, with Josh Gad being involved as a producer who is apparently a pretty big fan of the original. This project, as of recording this video, has gone into limbo, with the future of it ever being made seriously in question. Apparently, the reason for the production being stalled is because of the film's darker themes. Something that Disney argued in support of so many years ago, they're now afraid of today. It appears, according to an interview with Alan Menken, that a certain song seems to be a major reason as to why Disney is struggling with remaking Hunchback. And in the spirit of the original filmmakers, Alan Menken said something that I think perfectly sums up how I feel about this song. Do we remake Hunchback without Hellfire? I don't think so. Thank you so much for watching this video. Feel free to check out my other videos on animation if you're interested in anything else I have to say in regards to the medium. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to my channel so that you can be notified when the next video releases. If you would like to support me, I do have a Patreon, although watching this video is plenty. If you want to follow me on social media, I only have a Twitter or an X or whatever they're calling it now. Thank you so much for sitting through this whole thing, and to those of you who support my videos, thank you for coming back and watching me again. It truly means the world to me. Be safe, go watch a good movie, create something, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.
Morning, sir. Are you feeling all right?
I had a little trouble with the fireplace.